Force lightning. There is a moment in Return of the Jedi that almost no one describes accurately. As Palpatine unleashes his full power on Luke Skywalker on the floor of the second Death Star's throne room, he is not performing a technique, he is releasing something that lives inside him. Something he feeds and is fed by. In Force lightning is the dark side made visible. Arcs of electrically charged dark side energy that discharge from the fingertips, fueled entirely by hatred, rage, and contempt. On contact, it paralyzes, agonizes, and at full intensity kills. In The Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine's lightning during the Battle of Exegol stretched across the entire sky and brought down capital ships in an old man's hands, the end of a fleet. The canon confirms that Force lightning is less an ability one learns than a state one enters. Count Dooku first conjured it spontaneously as a young Jedi no Sith ever taught him. It erupted from a darkness already present in him, which is the most honest thing you can say about the power. It does not need instruction. It needs permission. The novel Queen's Hope offers a rare glimpse from Palpatine's own perspective, suggesting he experienced an emotional release from using it, and that there were moments where even he appeared unable to stop once he had begun. Some have speculated Sith can grow genuinely addicted to the sensation. Yoda absorbed Dooku's entire lightning discharge into his bare hands during their duel on Geonosis and redirected it. Galen Marek in the Legends continuity blocked Palpatine's barrage with his bare hands while walking toward him. These remain the exceptions. For almost every living being, there is no defense without a lightsaber. In the Legends continuity, an evolved variant called Force Storm existed, a hurricane of pure dark side energy expanding outward in every direction, consuming everything rather than targeting anyone. Vitiate, Revan, and Galen Marek were documented users. Subscribe if you want the rest of this explained. This is the kind of content this channel exists to make. Force choke. The first Force power ever shown in a Star Wars film was not a Jedi lifting a rock. It was Darth Vader raising one hand across a conference table on the Death Star and wrapping an invisible grip around Admiral Mahdi's throat. No contact. No weapon. Just intent. Cold and absolute. The dark side had arrived, and it had announced itself through someone else's inability to breathe. Force choke is a targeted application of telekinesis focused on the throat or chest, applying crushing pressure through the user's connection to the Force rather than through physical contact. Victims are typically lifted partially from the floor as the upward telekinetic force translates into a secondary lifting effect. The claw-like hand gesture most Sith use is not mechanically necessary, it is a focusing technique, a way of making the invisible real by giving it a shape and space. In severe applications, the grip can be tightened until bones fracture or oxygen is fully cut off. Vader used it the way some administrators use a pen routinely, without ceremony. His reasons went beyond preference. Encased in a machine that breathed for him, denied the full use of his own body, Darth Vader developed an almost psychological fixation on taking the breath of others. Kylo Ren inherited both the bloodline and the power, but where Vader applied Force choke with the controlled precision of a surgeon, Ren used it with the anger of someone who has not yet accepted what he is. That difference in character told you everything about their relationships to the dark side. The wide reach of the technique is worth noting. Anakin Skywalker used it on multiple occasions while still nominally a Jedi Mirage Sintel, Asajj Ventress, others. Luke used it on Jabba's guards. Even Grogu used it under duress. In every case, the pattern held. Nobody ever force-choked anyone out of serenity. Force drain. Force lightning is the dark side weaponized into electricity. Force drain is the dark side weaponized into hunger. The practitioner pulls life force or force energy itself out of another living being and absorbs it. In controlled use, a drained opponent grows weak and disoriented while the user strengthens. In its most extreme expression, it is an appetite that can, and the cost is borne by everything around the user until nothing living remains. The power's most extreme practitioner in the Legends continuity was Darth Nihilus, a Sith Lord of the First Jedi Purge approximately 3,950 years before the Battle of Yavin. Nihilus was not a person who used Force Drain. He was Force Drain created by the catastrophe of Malachor V, a wound in the Force so severe it left a permanent scar on the galaxy. Nihilus required the life force of others the way a biological organism requires food. He could not teach the ability. Kreia confirmed it could only be gained through experiencing its effects firsthand. And that experience was irreversible. The largest documented demonstration of the power was Nihilus consuming Qatar, an entire Miraluka colony world in the Mid-Rim. The Miraluka were a species that perceived the universe entirely through the Force. Every single one of them died. The hunger that drove him would have kept escalating, his reach growing to match his need until he was slain by the exile. In Legends, Sith Emperor Vitiate drained all life from his homeworld of Nathema through a ritual with 8,000 Sith, achieving immortality at the cost of everything living on that world, which afterward was absent from the Force entirely. A place where no one could feel the Force at all. Every Force-sensitive being who passed through Nathema afterward described it as a kind of suffocation, the absence of something so fundamental that its loss registered as physical sickness. Force Rage. Every dark side power is a bargain. Force Rage is perhaps the most nakedly transactional of all of them. The user reaches into their own pain and hatred and converts it into temporary physical enhancement: speed, strength, endurance, reflex, all amplified past what biology ordinarily permits. For the duration, the user becomes more than they were. Then the rage ends, and the body presents the bill. Muscles pushed past structural integrity, metabolic reserves burned through, the mind left open and vulnerable in the aftermath, stripped of the emotional insulation it normally maintains. Extended use causes cumulative physical corruption, the dark side simultaneously amplifying and consuming its practitioner. Darth Maul in the Legends continuity was among the most instinctive practitioners. His combat discipline, Form 7 Juyo, the most emotionally demanding lightsaber form, was built on the same philosophy: convert internal chaos into external lethality. His survival after being bisected by Obi-Wan on Naboo, clinging to consciousness through years on Lotho Minor, on a mechanical spider apparatus while barely rational, was sustained by concentrated hatred of a single person. That hatred kept his body alive past any physiological threshold. That is, Force Rage, taken to its theoretical limit, not a power activated in combat but a state maintained across years. In canon, Anakin's massacre of the Tusken Raiders on Tatooine was almost certainly amplified by the dark side converting his grief into something that crossed from suffering into atrocity. The line between ordinary emotional duress and Force Rage is a matter of degree, and it is easier to cross than to recognize in the moment. If you've searched for a place that actually goes this deep on Star Wars lore, subscribe. That's what this channel is. Force Fear. Most dark side powers work on the body. Force Fear goes directly for the mind. The practitioner reaches through the Force into the psychological architecture of a target, identifies their deepest fears, and forces those fears to the surface, amplified, vivid, and indistinguishable from reality. The victim does not perceive manipulation. To them, the horror is simply true. In the Legends continuity, Darth Zana and Darth Maul were the most documented practitioners. Maul used Force Fear against an Iktoki Black Sun Enforcer, a species with natural telepathic resistance. The Enforcer experienced such total terror that he took his own life rather than continue experiencing it. This is the distinction between Force Fear and ordinary intimidation. It is not projection from the outside, but excavation from the inside. The practitioner does not manufacture the fear. They find what is already present and make it impossible to ignore. Canon features related abilities throughout the Clone Wars and the High Republic era. During the High Republic, the nameless creatures directed by Marchion Ro produced a similar paralytic terror in Force-sensitive Jedi individualized hallucinations drawn from the victim's own fears, leaving them rigid until their bodies crumbled. Whether Force Fear and the predatory abilities of the Nameless share an origin in the fundamental nature of the dark side is a question canon has not yet answered. What is not in question is the philosophy. A frightened opponent is already half defeated before any blade is raised. The Sith did not invent this idea, they simply found a way to apply it with Force precision, bypassing every instinct the target possesses towards self-control and rationality and collapsing them from the inside. Mind Probe. Kylo Ren sits across from a restrained Poe Dameron in The Force Awakens. No visible gesture. No device. He simply reaches into Poe's mind and finds the map. Poe, who had survived every physical interrogation method the First Order possessed, had no defense against something that did not touch his body. The Force Mind Probe is an invasive telepathic technique that penetrates another person's thoughts, emotions, and memories by force, extracting information without the victim's cooperation. In skilled hands, it moves through layers of mental resistance with controlled precision. In Kylo Ren's case, canon sources confirm that his use of the ability exerted physical force on targets. Some were pinned down by the sheer pressure of his mental intrusion. His second use of the technique on Rey became the most significant mind probe scene in all of canon. Rey, with no training and no context for what was happening, managed to turn the probe around. She found his memories instead of surrendering her own. She discovered that Kylo Ren was afraid he would never measure up to Darth Vader. That single exposed vulnerability, drawn out by his own technique used against him, changed the dynamic between them for the rest of the trilogy. Darth Vader used a quieter variant. No interrogation, no confrontation, just reach and read. Aboard the second Death Star, he extended his awareness into Luke's emotional state and felt the conflict there. From that reading, he derived the existence of a twin sister information he had not known, extracted without Luke ever knowing it had been taken. Kyber crystal bleeding. This is not a combat power. It produces no arc of lightning, no visible grip, no transformation observable to a bystander. And yet Kyber crystal bleeding may be the most philosophically significant dark side technique in all of Star Wars, because it is the foundational act through which every Sith announces what they have become. It is how the Red Blade is born. Kyber crystals are living things. Canon is explicit about this across multiple sources. They are attuned to the light side of the Force, which is why they reveal themselves only to Jedi through the gathering ritual, bonding with the individual through a process that is as much spiritual as physical. When a Sith takes one of these crystals and bleeds it, they are committing an act of violation against a living entity. They pour all their hatred, pain, and rage into it through the Force, forcing it to absorb the darkness. The crystal resists. This is documented. The psychic struggle between the practitioner and the crystal can physically damage the practitioner, cause hallucinations, and expose the user's own unhealed wounds in the process. Darth Vader's bleeding of Jedi Master Infila's crystal on Mustafar, depicted in Charles Soule's Darth Vader comic series, saw the crystal show Vader a vision of what could have been: Padme alive, Anakin surviving, the dark side never having happened. He responded by pouring more grief and hatred into it than the crystal could refuse. It surrendered. It bled red. The comic does not frame it as triumph. Kylo Ren's unstable, cracked crystal in the sequel trilogy is the result of an imperfect bleeding. Without proper instruction, the crossguard vents on his hilt exist to bleed off excess energy from a crystal that almost broke under the process. Every red lightsaber ever shown in Star Wars canon is a document of this event. Somewhere behind it is a stolen crystal, a dead Jedi, and a moment of darkness poured into something that tried to resist. Force Crush. Force Choke controls. Force Crush destroys. While a Force Choke targets the throat and restricts breathing, Force Crush is a telekinetic compression applied across the entire body or directly against internal organs, collapsing them inward from within, fracturing bones from the inside out, without leaving a visible mark on the exterior. Against mechanical targets, the same technique crumples durasteel and transparasteel as though it were foil. In the canon novel Tarkin by James Luceno, Darth Vader uses Force Crush during an interrogation. Not during a battle, not in a duel, during a conversation, as a way of making a point. He reaches through the Force and applies compression to someone's internal anatomy with the same affect another person might use when raising their voice. The casualness of it is the most disturbing element. In the Star Wars comic series by Jason Aaron, Vader applied the same technique to an entire Imperial at Walker on Tatooine, collapsing and dismantling the vehicles simultaneously to demonstrate what telekinesis actually is when taken to its destructive ceiling. In the Legends continuity, Darth Traya used a variant to drain the 3 members of the Jedi High Council simultaneously during a confrontation that left them helpless. The ancient dark side entity Abeloth produced a wave of Force Crush powerful enough to level the entire city of Tov on Kesh beings, and the blast radius disintegrated, everything further out spontaneously combusting. Force transference. Every other power on this list is capable, at its extreme, of killing. Force transference defeats death itself. The practitioner's consciousness steps out of the dying body and into another. The original body does not survive. A new one does. And the galaxy has no idea. In canon, Darth Plagueis was the first to master the technique, his obsession with defying death so consuming that Palpatine weaponized the story of it as a seduction tool for Anakin Skywalker, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, told in an opera box on Coruscant, deliberately framed as a cautionary tale while concealing that Palpatine had murdered Plagueis himself and inherited the knowledge. Following his death at Vader's hands during the Battle of Endor, Palpatine used force transference to project his consciousness across the galaxy to a clone body prepared decades in advance on Exegol. The novelization of The Rise of Skywalker describes it, a falling, dying emperor calling on all the dark power of the Force to thrust his consciousness far away to a secret place he had been preparing. He arrived. He survived. But the clone body was inadequate, too fragile to contain the dark side power flowing through him, causing rapid physical deterioration and reliance on a mechanical harness for life support. He was not recovered. He was waiting. In the Legends continuity, the technique had a longer history. Darth Andadu preserved his consciousness after physical death by depositing it in his own tomb on Prakiath. Darth Bane extracted the knowledge by force from Andadu's holocron, when the gatekeeper refused to teach it, absorbing the holocron's contents directly into his mind. Bane later attempted to transfer his essence into his apprentice Darth Zana during their final duel. Her willpower repelled the intrusion. Some fragment of Bane persisted inside her briefly before she drove it out. Set Harth, a dark Jedi of the New Sith Wars era, used the same technique to pass his consciousness through a series of cloned bodies across centuries, discarding each around its 30th year, surviving at minimum to the era of the Yuzan Vong invasion. Hundreds of years, dozens of bodies, completely hidden. Sith alchemy. There is a category of dark side power that does not look like a power. It looks like chemistry. It looks like a craftsman's work. Sith alchemy is the application of the dark side to the permanent transformation of matter and living organisms, producing creatures that evolution could never have generated. Weapons that carry the dark side inside their molecular structure, and artifacts that retain the consciousness of their maker long after the maker is gone. The practice reaches back at least 5,000 years to Naga Sato, Dark Lord of the Sith during the Great Hyperspace War. Sato's experiments on Yavin 4 produced the Massassi, warrior servants transformed past humanity through sustained dark side biology. The Terrantiteks that appear throughout Legends creatures, engineered specifically to hunt force-sensitive beings, emerged from this alchemical tradition. Exar Kun, inheriting Sato's infrastructure 2,000 years later during the Great Sith War, continued the work, battle hydras, Sith spawn, biological weapons produced by manipulating life itself through the dark side. In canon, Sith alchemy appears most directly in the Clone Wars during rituals conducted by Palpatine and Dooku on Moraband, using Dooku's blood and his past connection to his former master Yoda to craft illusions powerful enough to deceive someone of Yoda's perceptual ability. Darth Plagueis in both canon and Legends was a master of midi-chlorian manipulation, the ability to influence the microscopic force-sensitive organisms that mediate a being's connection to the Force. His experiments reportedly allowed him to stimulate the creation of life without natural precedent. Palpatine eventually wrote a volume titled The Creation of Monsters, a practitioner's guide to Sith alchemy, documenting the shadow droids and chrysalis beasts his empire would deploy as weapons. The title is accurate. If you made it this far, you already know what kind of channel this is. Subscribe. And let's go deeper.